damage video. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
For more on Julian Assange, we're joined by Daniel Ellsberg, perhaps the country's most famous whistleblower. He leaked the Pentagon Papers in 1971, the secret history of the U.S. involvement in Vietnam. He joins us from Berkeley. Welcome to Democracy Now!
Amy.
Daniel, your response to the latest developments of the decision of Ecuador to grant asylum?
Well, I congratulate Ecuador, of course, for standing up to the British Empire here, for insisting that they are not a British colony and acting as a sovereign state ought to act. And I think they've done the right thing. I appreciate what they've done.
And the British government first threatening to raid the Ecuadorian embassy in London, also saying they would arrest Julian Assange if he attempted to leave to go to Ecuador, but also saying they'd actually raid the embassy.
It's an outrageous proposal which actually undermines the security of every diplomat in the world, in this country right now. I would say it has a chilling effect right now, the very fact that that possibility has been raised. I'm old enough to remember the occasion that gave rise to that, actually. I remember when a Libyan official shot from the Libyan embassy in London and killed a British female officer, Vivian, I think her name was, in 1984. The result of that was that they removed diplomatic recognition from Libya altogether, sent everybody home. They didn't raid the embassy on that occasion, but that led 3 years later to a law that permitted them under extraordinary circumstances to do that again. They obviously don't have anyone here who's been shooting from the Ecuadorian embassy at anyone. He's merely been telling the truth there, as in London earlier. He should be congratulated for that, not threatened.
And Dan Ellsberg, again, the extraordinary efforts that are being taken here by the British government and obviously the Swedish government, supposedly just to question him on allegations of a sexual attack, not even actual charges.
Well, everything that we've seen supports the position of his defense team that this is not about sexual charges in Sweden, essentially, that's a cover story. The whatever substance there may be to those stories, but the procedures that have been followed here are extraordinary. A red notice here, very unusually given, never under these circumstances, to arrest him, and these heavy efforts to extradite him after he had offered either to be questioned by the prosecutor herself or by some representative of her in the Swedish embassy or the British embassy or by British police in London, where he was, something that, by the way, is routinely done all the time, and expenses paid for that if necessary. All of that being refused. Why? In a situation where this man is charged with criminal charges by no country. Not by Sweden, not by Britain, not by the United States, although there may in fact be a secret indictment already waiting for him in the United States, being denied or lied about right now by my country. But no charges have actually been made public. So here all this emphasis just to get him charged, just to get him questioned, rather, when he's offered himself for questioning, even right now in the Ecuadorian embassy. The state of Ecuador has actually officially proposed that that take place in the Ecuadorian embassy or elsewhere, and in London, and that has been refused. All of this supports the idea that this is merely a way of getting him to Sweden, which apparently would be easier to extradite him from to the United States than Britain. If Britain were totally open to extraditing him, it would have happened by now, or 2 years have passed. But he's an Australian citizen, a member of the Commonwealth, and the criteria for extraditing somebody who's been telling the truth and is wanted for what can only be a political crime in another country are apparently more stringent here than they might be in Sweden. So I think that, in fact, I join his lawyers, Michael Ratner and others, in saying that he has every reason to be wary that the real intent here is to whisk him away to America, where it really hasn't been made as clear what might be waiting for him as I think one can conjecture. The new National Defense Authorization Act, and I'm a plaintiff in a suit to call that act unconstitutional in terms of its effect on me and on others, a suit that has been successful so far at the district court level and has led to that act being unconstitutional. But on its face, that act could be used against Julian Assange or Bradley Manning if he weren't already in military custody. Julian Assange, although a civilian and not an American civilian at that, would seem to me, a layman, to be clearly subject to the National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA, putting in military detention for suspicion of giving aid to an enemy, which he's certainly been accused of by high American officials. I don't see why he couldn't be put in indefinite contention without even the charges that I faced 40 years ago for doing the exact same things that he did.
The record of President Obama on whistleblowers, 6 whistleblowers charged under the Obama administration, more than under the administrations of all past presidents combined, Dan Ellsberg?
Twice as many as all past presidents. There was a total of 3 under past presidents, 1 each. I was the first ever charged with those charges. Obama has brought 6 such charges, and apparently his grand jury in Virginia is seeking at least a 7th and perhaps more against Assange and others. Twice as many as all previous.
You were charged, you were indicted for having secret documents and giving them away.
For possessing them and for possessing them without authorization. There was a second grand jury going on that would have gotten me in a second trial for distribution, which of course I was also involved in. I didn't contest any of the facts. And that would probably for the first time have brought in newspaper people like Neil Sheehan and Hedrick Smith. That was quashed after government criminality led to the ending of my trial, and so they dropped the other grand jury. As a result, we have no prior precedent of a newspaper person being tried under that charge. I was a former official. Julian Assange would be the first, again, charged. No newspaper person has been so charged.
And Dan Ellsberg, the impact already of this hounding of Assange by the Swedish and clearly with the United States government in the wings, behind the scenes, orchestrating a lot of this, the impact on WikiLeaks and on other whistleblowers, the message that's being sent that if you dare to go against the empire, you will be hounded and gone after?
That's hardly an amazing message. It was, of course, to be expected. There was reason to think that an international organization with no national roots here and using the internet would escape that kind of chilling effect. And they found the empire here is more resourceful and creative and less mindful of its own constitution and laws and traditions than one might have hoped. But anyway, it's hardly surprising that when you twist the lion's tail, the lion may get very angry. Their ability to shut off the funding by intimidating without even invoking the law, places like PayPal and Amazon and others, from giving any money to or serving as distribution channels is very dismaying. It's a sign, and not unique, of the way in which our fundamental rights, our Bill of Rights, our constitutional freedoms have been abridged by the last 10 years and more. And President Obama is unhappily following in that tradition. As I must say, I predicted unhappily when I urged people to vote for him 4 years ago. And
finally,
I'll predict it unhappily when I urge people in Florida and swing states to vote for him next time, not in the expectation that he will act like a president rather than a king. We have currently now, and have had for some years, the choice between 2 candidates for monarchy 4 years apart.
Julian Assange's statement after the Ecuadorian government granted him political asylum. He said, "I'm grateful to the Ecuadorian people, President Rafael Correa and his government. It was not Britain or my home country, Australia, that stood up to protect me from persecution, but a courageous, independent Latin American nation. While today is an historic victory, our struggles have just begun. The unprecedented U.S. investigation against WikiLeaks must be stopped." And Assange went on to say, while today much of the focus will be on the decision of the Ecuadorian government, it's just as important that we remember Bradley Manning has been detained without trial for over 800 days. The task of protecting WikiLeaks, its staff, its supporters, and its alleged sources continue. That from Julian Assange's statement yesterday. Final comment, Dan Ellsberg.
Absolutely. There's no reason to believe that he would get what in past years, including my time when I was prosecuted, would pass for a fair trial or for fair treatment in this country. I'm sorry to say that there's been something like a coup some 10 years ago, an executive coup against our Constitution and against the separation of government. It's outrageous that Bradley Manning's trial has again been postponed by the action of the government till next spring. He's already spent more than 800 days in confinement, 10 months of it and more in conditions that Amnesty International called torture. The idea that President Obama ended torture is simply not true. He didn't end it even in this country. In terms of isolated commitment, incommunicado, basically, and conditions of nudity in some cases intended to humiliate him, all intended to press him to cop a plea and reduce his sentence from the life sentence they're asking to a much lower sentence if he will only implicate Julian Assange in ways that would allow them to bring a trial without great embarrassment. Let me enlarge on that for a moment. They don't have to extradite anyone to bring someone under these charges, under the WikiLeaks disclosures. Everything Julian Assange could possibly be charged with under our law was committed as an act by Bill Keller, the managing editor of the executive editor of the New York Times. I don't mean that New York Times should be indicted or that Keller should be indicted. That would be an outrage, just as an outrage to think of indicting Julian Assange for exactly the same things. But meanwhile, Bradley Manning is facing charges that he aided the enemy, absurd charges that amount virtually to treason, and many people have even called for execution of either of them. Well, obviously, the same charges then could lead to Julian Assange being tried under the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act, which has just been found unconstitutional by a courageous and right-thinking judge in the District of Manhattan.
Dan Ellsberg, we want to thank
now, which has been found that act unconstitutional. That's the act under which I was tried. I wish I'd had the chance to go for an injunction under that judge. She's obviously right.
Dan Ellsberg, thanks so much for being with us, perhaps the country's most famous whistleblower. He leaked the Pentagon Papers in 1971, the secret history of U.S. involvement in Vietnam, joining us from University of California, Berkeley.